All right, it's time for take two. This is Adam D'Angeli once again from the Rescue Michigan Coalition. And tonight I'm going to do another short live stream covering a topic that I actually just made a video about. And it occurred to me that there's actually a really big point that I missed. And I wanted to get this one right because people are going to have questions. The topic of the video was the recent shooting of a pro-life activist who was canvassing and urging voters to vote no on Proposal 3. The abortion proposal that would legalize pretty much all abortions in Michigan, and additionally make it possible for minors in Michigan to have their sex changed or have their sexual organs mutilated without their parents' knowledge or consent. Small point about that proposal, but that's not really the point of this video. We're going to talk about is the shooting, and amazingly, the shooter has actually given a television interview. And the reason why I'm redoing this video is because in the first one we talked about the potential penalties and the likelihood that this individual can face these penalties, which for reckless discharge of a firearm causing injury is actually only a misdemeanor in Michigan, but that kind of left out a big topic, and that is felonious assault with a firearm. So I really want to talk about that as well, because that's an important thing, whether he may face misdemeanor charges or felony charges. So first off, for those of you who haven't heard the story, I will actually just play this clip from the news, which really gets to the issue as much as we really need to go into, because it not only includes the original story, but now also the interview with the couple. So I'm going to pause the video at important points here. And again, this was on the previous one, but I'm going to take the other video down because this one's going to be, I think, tighter and also more expansive in our analysis. But let's just go to the video. Here we go.
In Ionia County, Ken Kolker, News 8.
No, play that again. Play that again, Ken. Let's see here. I just had to reload the page. Here we go.
Said that the pro-life volunteer.
Start from the top, please.
Watch reports before shot life. The man who fired the shot said that the pro-life volunteer argued with his wife, refused to leave, and that he fired that shot accidentally. The man's wife says it started a week ago today with a knock on the door of their more than century-old farmhouse.
This lady comes up to me, knocks on my door, and says she's from some coalition to save women and babies. And she needed me to vote no on Proposal 3.
It's the proposal to keep abortion legal in Michigan.
And I told her I can't do that. And she said, well, you have to. And I says, no, I don't. It's not going to happen. I told her, I says, that I'd had a 4.5-month tubal pregnancy. And she says, well, you survived, didn't you?
All right, a couple of points we need to make here. First off, this is one woman's story, one side of the story, the side of the wife of the shooter. So whether or not any of this actually happened, we don't know. We cannot know unless there is video that might emerge, which probably is unlikely. But as we will see later on, these two, the husband and wife, are completely remorseless about shooting this woman. So whether or not you believe this story is, well, your decision. But I, for one, do not. The other thing I wanted to make a point about is the woman is also citing a completely bogus opposition to Proposal 3. She says she had a tubal pregnancy, which is when the egg doesn't settle in the uterus. And that's not an abortion. That's a miscarriage. But that's, of course, the false narrative that the radical left has been putting out about abortion in general and Proposal 3 in particular all over the past year. AOC lied about it. Gretchen Whitmer lies about it. They all lie about it. They live on lies. So they've constantly conflated miscarriage with abortion and claiming that outlawing abortion would be outlawing women having to have whatever surgeries they need to not be injured or killed by a miscarriage, which is ludicrous and absurd, but that's what they contend. Now, maybe this woman is intentionally spreading that propaganda, or maybe she's just unintentionally passing it along. We don't know. But that is important to make a note about. Also, another thing I need to point out too is that newscaster also lied about Proposal 3. Proposal 3 does not defend the right to abortion in Michigan. Abortion is illegal in Michigan. Roe v. Wade was overturned, and Michigan does not allow abortion except for the life of the mother, which, even if in her scenario it was an abortion, which it wasn't, would still be protected. But for the stay of a court, which is still under review. But absent that, if Proposal 3 does not pass, that will not maintain the status quo of abortion being legal in Michigan. The people of Michigan illegalized abortion, which is still the law of the land, but for first Roe v. Wade, and now Roe v. Wade overturned, a state court putting a stay on enforcing that 1931, I believe, law. Anyway, let's let her continue with her story.
Sharon Harvey says the tubal pregnancy in 1971 required surgery and nearly killed her. The argument, she says, was on.
Notice also the newscaster fails to correct her that that's not what an abortion is. The media will not give you the truth about any current event. They just cannot do it. They cannot possibly do it.
She would not take the fact that I was going to vote yes on Proposal 3 as an answer. She didn't care. She didn't care. I told her, I says, women are going to die. I nearly died. She says, well, you didn't, did you?
Again, do you believe this woman's story? Well, first off, anytime you go out knocking on doors, at least in my experience, when someone is opposed to me on anything that I'm knocking on doors for, my answer is, thank you. Well, thank you for your time. Have a nice day. And you move on to the next door. You don't spend your day arguing with people who are completely opposed to you. It's just not smart tactics, and it's something that people with common sense just don't do. So she's trying to craft the narrative that she was the victim of the woman that came to knock on her door. Now, whether or not that's borne out by any evidence other than the statements of her and her husband, we don't know yet.
I says, you need to go. Just go. She says, I have a right to be here. No, you don't. You need to go. You need to go now. Get off my property.
She said,
again, I don't believe any of this story, but for the sake of argument, if it was true that the homeowner says, get off of my property, you do have an obligation to leave. At that point, it is trespassing. However, you may not use deadly force to stop a trespasser. That's unlawful. You may only use deadly force to stop a deadly force threat. And that's what the law of self-defense is. One of those elements is, well, there's 5 of them. There's innocence, there's imminence, there's proportionality. If someone threatens to punch you in the face, you don't get to shoot them with a gun. So if there's no deadly force threat presented by an 83-year-old woman, you don't get to shoot them.
As the woman ignored at least a dozen warnings to leave.
And it got louder and louder. My husband was in the barn and he heard it.
Again, okay, we'll get to the husband in a second, but completely implausible story. The 83-year-old woman just kept getting louder and louder and louder.
I hear a bunch of screaming going on.
He says he came out of the barn with a .22 caliber rifle and fired a warning shot into the pine tree out front.
Thank you for admitting your guilt. Thank God this guy didn't talk to a lawyer before he talked to the media, because your lawyer would have shut you up quick. By the way, did you notice the ball cap he was wearing? Let me back this up just a little bit here.
The .22 caliber rifle and fired a warning shot into the.
Hold on, I gotta go back a little further.
Barn, I hear a bunch of screaming going on.
You can just make it out. You might see a little bit better and later on in the video, but it says right here, 74-year-old Richard Harvey is wearing a Fact Matter baseball cap. And actually, if you look closely,
with a .22 caliber rifle and fired a warning shot into the pine tree out front.
She's still ranting and raving, and she's got this clipboard. She's waving around. I'm thinking she's going to smack.
It's actually hashtag Facts Matter, is what it says. Hashtag Facts Matter, which is a left-wing trope. that they use constantly. I mean, all of these hashtag facts matter are all left-wing wackos. I mean, look, these people can't control their mouths on Twitter. By the way, folks, you know, cussing is a verbal art. If you're writing the F word in writing, or you're just conveying to people you have no control over your emotions. But yet, I mean, one thing after, this is all left-wing lunacy. So this guy's hat's telling you something. Anyway, let me rewind it a little bit so we can hear that story from him again.
So without thinking, and Raven
shot into the pine tree out front with a .22 caliber rifle and fired a warning shot into the pine tree out front.
So there you go. By the way, hi to folks in chat. Feel free to ask any questions. So the guy just admitted to the news cameras that he came out from the barn with his rifle and hears an argument, and the first thing he does is fire a quote-unquote warning shot, which is, by the way, at minimum, reckless misuse of a firearm. There is no such thing in law as firing a warning shot. If you fire in the direction of somebody, you are presenting a deadly force threat to them. At that point, had that canvasser been armed, she might have had the right to shoot back at him. She was taking fire. So he fires a warning shot at the tree, and then this happens next.
she's still ranting and raving, and she's got this clipboard. She's waving around. I'm thinking she's going to smack Sharon with it.
Again, do you believe this story? He just fired his rifle at her, and he says she is still arguing with the woman. Is that story credible?
So without thinking, I went to club it away with the rifle, and my finger was still in the trigger guard.
And it went off.
And it went off. It hit her about in here.
The victim volunteered.
All right, so he just admitted to reckless misuse of a firearm, which in Michigan, to my surprise, is actually only a misdemeanor. Again, you do not have the right to initiate deadly force against somebody. And by the way, by calling it an accident, he also just threw away any potential self-defense argument he may have had, which frankly in the situation was probably nothing to begin with. But again, if you're a lawyer representing this guy, you don't want him throwing away legal arguments by talking to the media and saying it was an accident. Because a self-defense argument is to not say it was an accident, is to say I used my weapon in self-defense. You can't claim both. A jury's not going to believe, well, if you don't buy that it was self-defense, then it was an accident. It doesn't work that way. And also, it was not an accident. Not by any legal definition of what an accident is. An accident in law is when something happens that you had no control over and no expectation of being able to prevent. Like, for example, if you are hired to help move a dresser in someone's second-story apartment, and unbeknownst to you, there's rot in the floors, termites have eaten away at the supports, and you set the dresser down, and the floor breaks and falls right through and lands on someone on the floor below and kills them. That's an accident. Something that you could not prevent and had no way of knowing about. Now, what if the tenant had told you before this happened, by the way, be careful, I've got weaknesses in my floor. And you forgot about that and you didn't exercise due care, then that might be negligence. Negligence is when you should have known something, but you didn't take due precautions to prevent it. Negligence is not a criminal offense. Although in the law we're going to look at in a second, it says negligent, but it's misusing the term. As courts understand it, negligence is a civil issue, and you might be sued by the victim if you failed to exercise due care. But that's what negligence means. Recklessness is the next step, and this is when it becomes criminal, is when you should have known something, you knew something or should have known something, and you didn't exercise caution. The classic example is drunk driving. Everybody knows that it's unsafe to operate a vehicle when you're intoxicated because we're all told that every single day. There's an assumption you know that that's not safe. And if you get behind the wheel when you're drunk and you injure or kill somebody, you are guilty of a crime of reckless homicide. You didn't intend to kill somebody, but knowing that you had a responsibility to be safe and you failed to abide by that responsibility and injured somebody, that's criminal negligence. And here's the thing. if what you're doing involves something that's inherently dangerous, like explosives, or a pharmacist handling medicine, or anything relating to firearms, you are automatically presumed to be acting recklessly if you fail to abide by the basic rules of safety. And every firearm owner knows what it means to be reckless with a gun. It's the 4 safety rules. They're taught in every weapons class in the country. And it's assumed if you own a firearm, you know how dangerous they can be and you have a duty of care. So what are the 4 safety rules? Treat every gun like it's loaded, unless you have personally inspected the weapon and determined it to be unloaded. And that disappears the moment you hand that off to somebody else. Now they have a responsibility to treat it as it's loaded until they inspect it and make certain for themselves that it's unloaded. That's the first thing. Second thing is to never point the muzzle in an unsafe direction. Never point the muzzle at anything you wouldn't want to destroy. The third rule is never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. And the final rule is be aware of your target and what might be behind it. Those are the 4 rules. The first 3 are the most important. And the beauty of them is, as long as you don't fail at least 2 of them, you won't injure somebody. Because even if you fail to treat a gun like it's loaded, as long as it's not pointed in an unsafe direction and your finger's not on the trigger, it won't fire. And it won't kill somebody. Even if you have your finger on the trigger, if it's pointed in an unsafe direction, it won't injure somebody. You might have a negligent discharge, which should really be called a reckless discharge, but you won't kill somebody if your muzzle is not pointed at them. And even if the muzzle is pointed at somebody, which is completely dangerous, but if your finger's not on the trigger, the gun's not going to fire. So you have to break 2 of those rules. And this guy clearly broke all 3. He knew his gun was loaded. He pointed it at the woman with his finger on the trigger. That's not an accident. That's not negligence. That's criminal recklessness. Open and shut. And he just admitted to that on camera. And that's really all there is to this, other than the possibility he could be charged with something more, which is intentionally shooting that woman. So let me talk about that. And this is why I had to redo this video, because I didn't talk about this in the first one, not to the adequate extent. Let's play the rest of this first so you guys can see the rest of it. There's not much more left of this clip. Here we go.
To life, which says the woman was peaceful and was walking away when she was shot in the back. She drove herself to a nearby police department and is recovering. Michigan State Police are investigating. Are you afraid you might be facing some charges?
It's always possible. I mean, yeah, I shot somebody.
Thank you.
It was an accident.
The Ionia County prosecutor says he's still waiting for state police reports before deciding on whether to file charges. In Ionia County, Ken Kolker, News 8.
Yeah, hopefully the prosecutor is only deciding how many charges to file. So, here's what the statute says about careless, reckless, or negligent use of firearms, and really all of these mean reckless. Any person who shall recklessly or heedlessly or willfully or wantonly use, carry, handle, or discharge any firearm without due caution or circumspection for the right, safety, and property of others shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. And I think in one of these it actually specifies what the penalties are. Let's see here. Injury of property gets you to that. Here we go. Discharged so as to kill or injure another person shall be guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by imprisonment in the state prison for not more than 2 years or by a fine of not more than $2,000 or in a county jail for not more than 1 year. So arguably, he could even face 2 charges for both of the shots fired, the one into the tree in her direction and the one into her shoulder apparently is where it hit. Although, again, we're getting these stories from the media, so the facts are not entirely clear. But what about this charge? Felonious assault, except as provided in subsection 2, a person who assaults another person with a gun, revolver, etc., without intending to commit murder or to inflict great bodily harm less than murder is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment or for not more than 4 years or a fine of not more than $2,000 or both. So now we're in felony territory here. And of course, there's even a higher charge of attempted murder. But the standard of evidence goes higher and higher the more you're charging. In this charge, you have to be able to show to the satisfaction of a jury that you assaulted the woman. It was not an act of recklessness. You didn't intend to commit murder or to inflict great bodily harm less than murder, but you intended to cause some harm. In fact, this might even fit the and you know, look, folks, I'm not an attorney, but this certainly might fit. And the other question is, what are the other facts that we don't know yet? We don't know the victim's testimony. We don't know what she will say happened, what her recounting of events are. Who's the jury more likely going to believe? The shooter or the person who was shot? The statements they made in the media are likely admissible. They've demonstrated a political animus. The husband, in fact, wearing that hat, that's, again, I mean, it's up to the courts, but that's at least arguably admissible that he has shown a partisan animosity to the person at the door. Then again, the fact that he started opening fire before he apparently even knew what was happening is a problem. And here's the other problem. What if it turns out that the injuries to the woman are consistent with being shot in the back, as she said, and not with what the man said, which was that he took his rifle and used the muzzle of his rifle to smack the clipboard out of her hands as she is holding the clipboard in front of her to shoot her in the shoulder? What's the evidence going to show? These are all big questions. What happens if anything that they just told the news media turns out to be untrue based on the evidence, or is at least dubious based on the evidence? Then suddenly they can have their credibility as witnesses impeached. So could they face these charges? Certainly. That's the prosecutor's decision. And the prosecutor doesn't have much incentive not to bring maximal charges, which might be bargained down in a plea deal to admitting to reckless discharge of the weapon and avoid trial. That often happens. Prosecutors bargain charges down. Depends on the prosecutor. This was in Ionia County, which to the best of my knowledge is a conservative county. That does not mean that the prosecutor doesn't have unknown political motivations. So there's a lot of open questions about this. What might he be charged with? Well, potentially attempted murder, aggravated battery, potentially nothing. That's what we assumed Alec Baldwin was going to get for a long time. It now looks like that may change. By the way, Alec Baldwin, that's a textbook case of reckless homicide with a firearm. Again, he had the duty of care of the firearm to verify that it wasn't loaded with the live round before he pointed it at Helena Hutchins and pulled the trigger. So, yeah, any of those things are possible. So we're going to obviously keep an eye on this case. The most important fact about this case is that it's a hate crime, most likely. And it'll be a real question whether justice is done or whether, once again, justice only works for Democrats, never for Republicans. And lastly, once again, I'd make the point that, and again, we don't necessarily want to believe this woman's testimony, but assuming it was true, for the sake of argument, that's not what you should do going door to door talking about this issue. When a woman says, I can't vote for this because I had to have, I had tubal pregnancy and I had to have surgery. You don't argue with them about that, well, but they're still babies. No, that's when you explain to them, that's not an abortion, that's a miscarriage. That wouldn't be affected by this. You're being lied to by the radical left. That's when you show voters how they're being deceived. Just a tactic to put out there. Again, whether or not that's what actually happened is questionable. So there you go. I think that's all I've got on this topic for right now. If you have any questions in the chat, let me know. Although I'm going to probably call this a stream. This video is actually gone. Where's my, oh, this is longer than the original one was, I guess, because I talked about more things. So there you go. And again, I always forget to mention this. If you like this kind of content, be sure you like and share the video. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Facebook. We're not live on Rumble right now. I will upload this to Rumble shortly. So as always, folks, thanks for all you guys do for liberty. And of course, that means doing everything that we can to bring the public the truth between now and Election Day, because time is short. The mass media are our enemies, and it's up to us to tell people what's really going on in Michigan. So as always, thanks for all you guys do for liberty. Peace out.